Good afternoon, everybody. By my devices, it is now past 12:30, which is our promised start time for the first of a series of webinars brought to you by Racing Together. We're going to be very disciplined today and finish at 1:15 because we're very grateful to our panel who will come to shortly, and indeed you as our audience for tuning in. And we don't want to take up the entire of a traditional lunch hour, but certainly 3/4 of it. So we will be ending at 1:15 today. I'm John Blake, and I have the privilege of working for Racing to School, the education charity, and Racing Together. And this series, as I said, is brought to you by Racing Together, that represents the country's community engagement across racing. We hope in today's webinar and a series that we'll be running over the next few weeks and months to explore some topics that the sport will find very interesting. We're bringing together some voices both in the sport, but I think equally critically outside the sport, in terms of topics worthy of discussion. We're recording, as I said, today's webinar. So for those of you who are watching this in recording, please keep watching because it's brilliant. I can promise you that. So wherever you are in the world and you're coming to us late, keep going because it's well worth staying with us. In terms of signing up for future webinars, I'm going to do a shameless plug now, if I may. And Lucy Gurney, who's the brains behind the webinar series, is going to put up a slide now that just indicates some of the other themes that we'll be discussing in the weeks ahead. If I can ask Lucy to do that. And there we are. That's a snapshot of what we're hoping to cover. Hopefully, some alluring subjects for you over the weeks to come. As I said, the best way to get those is to sign up for our newsletter on the Racing Together website. So please do that. And as I said, a recording of today will be available tomorrow on the website. So before we get into it, I'd like to thank again Lucy Gurney and Georgina Crabb for bringing this series together, to the Levy Board for being funders of Racing Together as well, and of course the panel for giving up your time. For those of you tuning in, if you wish to ask a question of the panel, please use the Q&A. I think we're all fairly used now to the world of Zoom and how we use that. I'll keep an eye on the Q&A and ask me again if I've forgotten, but I will try and get to you by the end of the session. And we'll also have a poll as well, a very simple, fairly binary poll toward the end of the session as well. But let me introduce the panel, if I may, who kindly joined us today. We have Daniel Bliss. Daniel works for YGAM, Young Gamers and Gamblers Education Trust, which has been a charity that has grown hugely in the last 7 years. Daniel works as Director of External Affairs, works with a huge number of schools and universities across the country. Very much looking forward to his views. We've got Ian Daly, who's getting us in stereo today as the Racing to School team are at his school, Maricourt High School in McGull, where we've got him here as well. So Ian joins us. He's the curriculum leader for PSHE&E, which of course you all know stands for, and I've written it down, Personal, Social, Health, Economic Education. And I think citizenship is now the latest one added to that as well. For those of you in racing, Debbie Hay will be no stranger to you. Very much a familiar and incredibly friendly face at Lingfield for so many years. Debbie is Chief Executive of the not-for-profit organisation Take the Reins, which works with a number of youth organisations to open up the doors to racing for their beneficiaries. So we're looking forward to listening to Debbie's views. And last but by no means least is Lauren Hilton, who joins us from the Tote, who is their compliance director. And so what are we asking and why are we asking it now, I suppose, is the question. Well, it is Safer Gambling Week, and it has been this week for 5 years on this week, where the industry looks to raise awareness of the important issues around safer gambling. So it seems a perfect time for us to be looking at this subject. There's a review, as some of you may know, of the 2005 Gambling Act. The role of the Gambling Commission is being looked at, and only last week, in effect, the age was raised from 16 to 18 for people to purchase all national lottery products. So there's plenty going on in this world, in this space, and it seemed right to us that racing should be involved in this conversation in some ways to talk through some of these issues. So perhaps if I can ask the panel, and if I start with you, Debbie, if I may, just the simple question, if you like, or the hard question that we came in on: can racing talk about betting and its engagement with young people?
Thank you, John. Yes, it can and it should, effectively, is my view. I think we can't hide the fact that betting is intrinsic to the industry. And I think we have a joint responsibility to talk about betting in all its terms, but mostly to educate the young people that we're trying to bring into the industry in whatever guise, be that as sports fans or as participants, to do so in a responsible manner. But we can't ignore the fact that betting is there and it's here to stay.
And Ian, as I said, you have a relationship with the racing industry through Racing to School and Aintree Racecourse, the Injury Equestrian Centre, all part of the Aintree Beacon programme. Your take on that? You've obviously seen YGAM at work, because we introduced the YGAM charity to Marrick Court. From your point of view and through the eyes of your pupils, where do you stand on this?
Well, I think as Deborah said, then, I mean, it's a part of the racing industry, but from a school's point of view, I mean, we've got to do what we can to educate students about the consequences of gambling, because there's no getting away from that. That, you know, gambling is an addiction, and it is you know, it's something that we would teach as part of sort of healthy lifestyles. You know, we would class it as a risky behaviour. So, from a school's point of view, you know, we're absolutely delighted to have that relationship with Racing to School and with obviously with Aintree Racecourse. You know, the Grand National takes place here every year. It's a big part of our local culture, so students are aware of horse racing. They're aware of you know, everything that I suppose is involved in going to a day at the races. And that's not just because of the work that you do with the school, but you know, also because their families and friends and stuff go as well. So I think we've got an obligation to make sure that students are aware of the consequences of gambling, so that, you know, we know it's a part of the industry, but they need to have the sort of the right information to be able to you know, to make the right choices, basically, as they become of you know, legal age.
And a supplementary one to you then, Ian, does the subject of betting crop up independently from the pupils?
Not necessarily when we're talking about, you know, the work that we do with the race course and yourselves. It's not always something that they make that instant connection to. Some of them absolutely will, particularly as they get older. When YGAM were in school, it was very much more, I think a lot of the, especially young males, we spoke much more about sports betting for them, because football, I think, is probably the more accessible way into gambling. Certainly that's something that we notice, you know, as sixth form students in particular start to become old enough to be able to gamble and have those apps on their phone, then it becomes, you know, a real concern for us, really, because we have had that in the past, where you're kind of aware of students who are engaging in sort of in betting, and as I say, it's that obligation that we've got to make sure that they've got the knowledge to understand, you know, the dangers of it and the consequences of it. But I think from the racing point of view, I think it takes a little while for students to make that connection.
And Daniel, pick up the baton on that, if you would, because the work of you and your colleagues, as I said, for 7 years now, across a huge number of schools, universities, and other young people settings as well. Tackle the question for me as well, but add on where and if racing comes into those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned at the start the growth of the YGAM charity over the past 5, 6, 7 years. I think that growth probably tells you that there's a huge demand for education on gambling harms. We're firm believers that education is essential to prevent gambling harms. I think Ian also mentioned sort of young people knowing about gambling before they turn 18. I think particularly in the last 5 years, the amount of gambling advertising has increased significantly. So I think it's naive to think that young people are unaware of gambling before they turn 18. So that's why for us it's really important that children and young people are getting the education before they turn 18, just like they do on other issues such as alcohol and drugs. So when they do turn 18, they can make informed choices and they can understand the potential risks of gambling. It's great to have Ian on the call, and I think, I'm sure he'll agree, it was good to see in the last 12 months, gambling has now been formally added to the PSHE curriculum. So again, that has really helped raise awareness of the issue and helped us as a charity get into the schools and put it onto the agenda for schools. And I think for us, a collaborative approach is the best approach to raise awareness and reach young people and to sort of prevent harm. And that means for us working with schools, universities, health professionals, youth clubs, but also, as you say, you know, I think there is a really big role that industries can play, and certainly racing can be one of those. We talked about football. There's a big conversation around gambling and football at the moment. And as you know, Wygam, we don't have sort of a policy team to go into all the sort of policy debates. However, from what we know, and you know, each football club, most football clubs have a betting partner. Most football clubs also have a charity partner, a community trust or a foundation that goes out into communities, into schools, to do important work around safeguarding young people. We've had huge success in working with a lot of those foundations and community trusts. And actually it makes a big difference. Somebody going into a school with a football club badge on that works for the club, actually promoting our messages around safeguarding, around gambling, really does make a difference. And I think as we're seeing more our work grow, I think there's opportunity to work with industries, both in sport and outside sport, to also sort of collaborate so we can sort of raise awareness together.
And Lauren, to you, the question, obviously you wear a very unique hat in this conversation as compliance director at the Tote. Obviously there are huge safeguards and legislation and regulation in place that is absolutely fundamental to the way the Tote brand synonymous with racing for you know many years, the way it operates. Do you come up against this question, if you like, in terms of wanting also to engage young people in the positive sides of the sport, but also being aware of the issues that we're discussing today?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, definitely agree with the comments that have been made already by the panelists, that it's important to inform young people about the realities of gambling, you know, and how it does interact with industries like horse racing, of course, making sure they're aware of the inherent risks within gambling, and the point that's already been made that, of course, we don't want to wait until our young people are 18 and legally of age and able to gamble before we start doing that education. And I think having many and varied voices in that conversation as an ongoing conversation with young people, and the collaborative approach is really important. You know, as the Tote, as a betting operator, we're not going to have direct conversations with young people. That clearly wouldn't be appropriate, but we very much want to support many and varied organisations in taking part in that conversation.
And staying with you then, Lauren, if I may, I mentioned at the top about, obviously, the Gambling Act is under review at the moment, and a number of other issues are also under review, highlighted this week at Safer Gambling Week. What does this week present as an opportunity to an operator like yourselves to get out the wider messages? Because young people become slightly older young people and then become old people. It's lifelong relationships with racing that so many of ourselves and our attendees will be interested in. Explain a bit about the purpose of this week in enabling you to do that.
Well, I think Safe Gambling Week has a really important role to play. It's a number of years into its development now, and it's definitely a sort of landmark in the calendar, and just having an opportunity to, with one voice across the industry, reinforce that safer gambling message and make it really accessible, because I think that's the key thing for me, certainly, that I'd like people to take away from Safer Gambling Week, is that safer gambling is for everyone. It's not for people who feel that they have reached a point where they have a problem, where they have real difficulties, which of course, some people do, but it's about taking that safer gambling message and just making note of it yourself as any occasional gambler, and making use of the tools that are available across all websites. But on the Tote, of course, we have different tools to allow people to set their own limits for deposits, for loss-based limits, and other information about where to get help and support and advice from different organisations as needed.
And sticking on then the sort of law and clear regulation question, then maybe to start with you, Ian, and then you, Daniel. I mean, should we be leaving it to the law and to the regulation, given that we're talking about young people, and 18 is a very hard line in terms of legally being able to gamble? Should it be the responsibility of parents or engaged teachers like yourself and so many others that we work with? Some of the discretionary topics around citizenship as well, or do we demand more both from perhaps the lawmakers or indeed the sports themselves, such as racing?
I think it's for me, it's probably a combination of all of those things, really. It's got to come from everyone. I think Daniel and Lauren have both said about the idea of collaborative approaches. So it has to, we have to have those laws in place. They have to be fit for purpose, and then there is that obligation on the side of the gambling companies, as well as then the industries that I suppose benefit from gambling, like racing and other sports, and then because of that, obviously, as with everything, schools always have to teach students about it. Whatever problems there are in society, we'll always be asked to kind of make sure that we're doing our bit to educate young people about it. So it's like it's already been said, education is absolutely crucial around the subject, and from an early age right the way through to when they leave us when they're 18. That education is absolutely vital, but we need those partnerships, like Daniel said before. We need the charities, but also the work from like yourselves, like A3 Racecourse and the Jockey Club rather. We need those kind of partnerships to help us deliver that in school, because it is so much more impactful when when the students see people from the racecourse come in, when they get to visit the racecourse. We also have partnerships with Everton in the community, for example, as well. And when they see those people come into school with their, with the uniforms and the badges on, they listen to them. If it's just teachers telling them, that message it's not always kind of conveyed in the most convincing way. Also, some students won't be as engaged, whereas when it's an external visitor, and they see they're from this organisation, then, as I say, it is much more impactful for them.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think our portfolio of programs probably tells you our view on this. We have programs for parents, we have programs for universities, for health professionals, for schools. I think by equipping all of these groups with the knowledge and understanding of gambling harms and the potential risks around it, I think actually those are the key people that have influence over young people as they're growing up. So the more we as a charity can provide them with sort of the resources and support to do that, the better chance we have of protecting our young people. I think the reason the Gambling Act review is currently taking place is the current legislation is outdated. There's a reason that the government have chosen to do this. I think it's not hard to realise that since 2005, a lot has changed, including sort of the digital revolution of things, and how people gamble has changed. People can gamble on their phone. So also, I think collectively we also have to be agile and adapt to the sort of the trends in society and how people are gambling, and make sure sort of the education and awareness also fits that.
And interestingly, Ian mentioned about partnerships, and you're very active in particular with football. I mean, for any QPR or Nottingham Forest fans out there, and I think there is one. In fact, I know who is tuning in for a while at least. I think a game or two. Both of those teams had the YGAM logo on them as a shirt sponsorship. What was the thinking behind that, and just thinking about any lessons racing can learn in terms of that?
Yeah, so we were very grateful for QPR and Nottingham Forest last year. They donated their shirt sponsorship to YGAM for Safer Gambling Week. And for the Nottingham Forest game, we were live on Sky Sports, and reaching an audience of literally millions of people. And I think that just demonstrates the role in which industries can play. Football clubs are working at the heart of communities, a bit like race courses, and by actually those lending their platform to charities like YGAM, we were able to reach an audience that a charity like us wouldn't normally be able to reach, and through that we received sort of a sharp increase in inquiries, and as a result of that we managed to sort of get our message and resources out to those communities. So it was fantastic. And Wolverhampton Wonders this week on Monday, they played in their Premier League game against Everton, and for that game they did a feature in their match day programme and on their website, again just telling the story about YGAM, an interview with some of our staff, and again we automatically saw a sort of huge increase in people hitting our website and obviously reading our content, that's what we want to do.
Thank you. And Debbie, just thinking about the work of Take the Reins specifically, and if you like, unlike the more traditional, and by that I guess I include racing to school and pony clubs and some of the more traditional routes into racing, whether it be through education or training or employment. The hard task set for Take the Reins is to reach the harder to reach communities, isn't it? In terms of youth engagement. When you've done that and then doing that very successfully, does racing's relationship with betting or betting per se come up in any of those sort of interactions?
It does when we're facilitating on a racecourse, because they're looking and seeing bookmakers there. So often you get questions, but an awful lot of the groups we're working with are more familiar with bookmakers on the high street, because often when we're bringing them to the racecourse, it's their first interaction with racing live. So often we'll have conversations with young people, and they tend to be older young people, so later teens really. So legally they can gamble if they want to. Do they gamble when they're on the racecourse? Very few of them, interestingly. Because they're not used to the environment, I think. So many of them will talk about family members visiting bookmakers when they were young. That's their first interaction with racing, I think. It's a conversation that we have. It's a conversation we're very keen to build into any courses we run from next year, because I think it's crucial. And it's a conversation I personally think we should be including in the whole introduction to racing, because intrinsically it's part of it. And I think the more we can open up these conversations, all of us as a natural, and stop shying away from the fact that gambling is a part of the industry, the better for all of us.
And in terms of diversity and inclusion, lots of great work goes on across the sport. There's a real momentum behind that now, and of course, a lot of your work and beneficiaries would come from different cultural backgrounds, religious backgrounds, for which betting, of course, is simply not on the table in any sense. Again, it is. Do you get any sense of the link between the two, generally off-putting young people about racing as a concept, even, let alone as attending a race meeting?
It's interesting. I think the older members of those communities, yes, it does put them off, and they would like to, they've very much voiced that they would like to see separate areas almost, or safer areas within racecourses. The younger generation genuinely know. They're, even those who are from a religious point of view are against it, the same as alcohol. They still don't want there to be segregation on the racecourse because they think that everybody should be able to mix still. So there's very much a difference between generations, we're finding.
Great. We have a question from the floor, as it were. Penny Taylor. Thank you, Penny. A question for Ian, but everyone can chip in here. Penny asks, what age do you believe the messaging should start? Back to what we were talking about earlier.
I think as early as possible, because young people are introduced to, I mean, we wouldn't call, I don't know whether we would class it as gambling, but young people, you know, year 7, I'm sure younger as well, in primary school, they're playing, they're gaming, you know, they're doing online gaming. And I think for a lot of them, there's, you know, they're kind of, I'm not really an online gamer myself, but I know they buy stuff, you know, like packs for FIFA and things. And it's this idea of like paying money for something and they see what they get if they get like a certain player or whatever, which then they can use in their team. And that's happening really young. You know, some of them are using parents' accounts or credit cards or debit cards or whatever to purchase these things. You know, all in the name of, you know, trying to help them, you know, win a game of football or unlock things on other games. So, you know, they're kind of being introduced into that world of like of paying for something where they might get something that'll help them, if you like, which I suppose then leads into the idea of gambling. And then, as I mentioned before, you know, as they get older, and they take even more of a keen interest in sport, and they start to see other people, you know, Daniel mentioned before about how, you know, betting's changed. You know, they can literally access it on their phone now. They can download apps. They can, I mean, even games and stuff where they're asked to make these in-game purchases and things. You know, we class all of that, you know, within the sort of the same topic, if you like, for PSHE, which is the idea of, you know, living a safe and healthy life, you know, and these are things that we would class as risky behaviors. And that's why it's so important to get the message across as early as possible, to educate young people on the consequences, the potential dangers, and give them the skills to kind of recognize what might be deemed as being an unhealthy behavior, looking at where that could lead. So yeah, the earlier the better for us.
And let me follow up on that one in terms of parents and parents' view of that sort of education. I speak as a dad of a 13-year-old who had a 17-page document about the changes in sex education in school, which after page 9 frightened me to death, I don't mind telling you. But, you know, it's a lot different when it comes to, you know, the topic that we're talking about today. And parents will naturally be on their guard about this, I imagine. Have you got any sort of feedback in the work that perhaps we've done with the Aintree Beacon and wider work that we do with Wigan? Yeah,
I mean, parents in our school are generally supportive of the things that we do. I mean, even when it comes to sex education, the bottom line is that a lot of these things are statutory. We've got a duty to teach young people about them. And as I say, because of that, parents generally are supportive. I mean, certainly the stuff we do with the Beacon project, I mean, yeah, the work we've done in school, parents are, you know, really supportive of. You know, the students enjoy it. The parents give great feedback, you know, after students have been involved in any of the things that we've done, whether that's visits to the racecourse or we kind of do enterprise sessions. We have students doing work experience at the racecourse. So parents are very much appreciative of that kind of relationship that we've got with Aintree. and you know, we hope that that work can continue, and I'm sure we would have parental support, you know, whenever we do deliver the messages that we try to get across about gambling or indeed any of the topics. It's very rare that we get parents' opposition, to be honest with you.
Daniel, I know you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, no, I was going to come into, again, agree with Ian, and I think so. Our schools program was one of our first programs. Our parents program came from the schools program, from schools saying, you know, there is demand for this. So in lockdown, we launched a parent hub website. So that's www.ygam.parents.org, and that has lots of information around gaming and gambling, and we encourage sort of schools to share that on their websites as well. And also 7 years ago, we were solely a gambling education charity. Now, how we've evolved in those 7 years is now we focus on gaming for the reasons that Ian's mentioned. The gaming world and the gaming industry is far larger than the gambling industry will ever be, and young people, I think the research is 93% of young people in the UK play video games every week. So they are playing these games, and as Ian mentioned, a lot of these games now have features in that can be compared to gambling. You know, they are buying loot boxes, which, you know, you effectively pay to try and get a kind of weapon or a type of character, and you basically keep paying until, you know, it's basically a lucky dip until you get it. So, you know, there are at the moment, the government are looking at loot boxes as well. It's not currently classed as gambling, but it's a big topic. But I think it does, again, make the point that regardless of any sort of new laws or legislation that's brought in, we need to be educating young people about these risks, and absolutely we need to be educating parents as well, particularly around sort of loot boxes, as it's usually the parents that are paying for these games and lending the credit card for somebody to come back with a £100 bill on it from a child playing game. So yeah, education for all is a key part of what we do.
And Lauren, to bring you back in, if I may, in terms of, Daniel sort of touched on it. I mean, the explosion of betting products is exponential, isn't it, in terms of offering customers a huge platform, racing fights for its piece of the pile on that. Are you finding a younger sort of demographic playing some of these sort of new games and some of the safeguards you've had to maybe put in place there?
Yeah, I mean, at the Tote, our brand actually has a much older demographic on average. Well, the majority of our customers are well into middle age, shall we say, but of course we do have some young customers, and you know, we are particularly mindful of the risks, particularly around that 18 to 24 age group. And the reason they are widely recognised as more at risk is because of you know, the developmental stage you're at that time in life in terms of managing and understanding risk. And that can obviously have consequences for you if you are gambling. So we have different limits in place for customers in that age group. So essentially we will be interacting with them, checking up on them and other things at an earlier point and more often than we would our older customers, and that's really on a precautionary basis, and also to make sure that we're keeping them informed, giving them information to help them stay in control. So yeah, it's not something that particularly affects us because we don't have that younger demographic, but it's something we are very mindful of.
Turning our attention to maybe mental health and well-being, there's a clear link. We know those suffering from gambling harms and deterioration of mental health. That's well recorded. In terms, again, back to maybe you, Ian, to start with, and Daniel's and Debbie's experience as well, would be really useful to know the sort of the signs and the community protections, if you like, in terms of environments that are educational or charitable, when interacting with young people, to notice the change in behaviour, and that may first have maybe years ago been seen to be something other than related to a potential gambling problem, but now perhaps that's on at least the menu of thought when someone is suffering with some mental health or well-being issues.
Yeah, I think mental health is a huge issue in schools. It has been for a number of years now. It was certainly sort of, I would say, it kind of exploded in schools a couple of years ago, maybe four or 5 years ago. We just started noticing a huge increase in the number of students seeking advice, talking about anxiety, unfortunately, other more, sort of more serious behaviours as well. And then COVID has obviously only exacerbated that further. But it's definitely something I think gambling will definitely contribute to that. I think particularly for young males, I think it's, it seems to be there's a lot of kind of mental health issues around gaming, like we were talking about before, which is where it starts for young males in schools. I mean, young females as well, but particularly males when it comes to things like the online gaming. You can see there's a lot of anxiety around them playing online games, because they're, when they're at home playing their games, they chat to each other online. They have group chats and stuff linked to the games that they play. A lot of that spills over into school. It links to things like them not getting enough sleep at night, which then has a detrimental impact on their mental and physical health as well. But yeah, I mean, gambling definitely contributes to that. I think when especially once it gets to a stage where it's kind of troubling people, and as I say, quite often we'll get the spill out of that in school.
And Daniel, just take that forward for us, if you would.
Yeah, I think so mental health and the links between mental health and gambling, harms and addiction forms a key part of all of our education programs. We also launched the Mindful Resilience program, which actually provides resources and training for health professionals and mental health professionals. So actually, when a young person does go and see their GP or does go and see a specialist about their mental health, how do we then help them understand that gambling and, as Ian said, gaming could actually be part of that problem and could contribute to that. So it's definitely a big part of what we do, and an increasingly big part of what we do. We also had former Premier League footballer Marvin Sordell as our first ever ambassador last year. Now Marvin retired from football at age 29 because of his mental health problems. So our relationship with him also helps us reach young people and get young people talking about mental health, and also incorporate it into those conversations around gambling harms.
And Debbie, do you think it's a great example from Daniel about an ambassador in the world of football? What about racing's responsibility here?
Yeah, I think we've got a huge responsibility, to be honest. And I think, again, I sound a bit like a stuck record, but it's about being open about it. It's about talking about it, and it's about not shying away from the potential risks that we all face, and particularly young people. I think there's, certainly in the communities we're working in, there's a real fear about the post-COVID effect on young people and mental health. If we're talking about gaming, these young people were forced to stay in their homes with nothing else to do. Sociologists are going to have a field day in a few years, because when you look back on the effect of that on these young people, it's really, really scary. So yeah, going back to what we've all said, collaboration, education, being as open as we can, but also facing up to the joint responsibilities that we've all got. That's the key, I think. We need to find ways to work together to help these young people.
Thank you. Well, we're approaching 6 minutes before I promised we would stop, and we will stop then. By all means, anyone listening in, please put a question to us, to the panel. We certainly could sneak one in. Very happy to do that. Got plenty of my own, but I'm sure yours are far more interesting and relevant. So please, by all means, send a question through. We'll also be doing a poll in a couple of minutes as well. But I guess the final one for me would really be about the benefits versus the negatives, I suppose. And again, through the racing binoculars, if you like, when we look at this, to the benefits of talking to young people at an early stage with an informed voice. So not letting someone else talk on racing's behalf, but actually with an informed voice about the part that betting plays, the intrinsic part betting plays in racing, and take a public lead. Does that benefit, if it seemed to be a benefit, outweigh the potential accusation of encouraging underage gambling? Or perhaps people will be worried that we might come under some uncomfortable scrutiny. That's, to me, seems to be a bit of a seesaw of choice for our sport. I don't know, maybe Lauren, you might pick up on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just come back to something that's been mentioned already, and particularly by Deborah, is just the responsibility that we do all have as stakeholders in this area and on this issue, which is, yeah, the responsibility we do have. And there might be some uncomfortable moments, and there are vocal opponents essentially to anything gambling related out there. But I think part of doing this right is facing into that. And I think if there is that collaboration and working together, then that's something that can be dealt with. And I'd certainly say the benefits far outweigh that negative.
Thank you. Ian?
Yeah, I think the benefits absolutely outweigh any negatives. I think obviously there's the issue of how you do it. You know, the message needs to be very clear. It needs to be about, you know, highlighting the consequences of gambling, the sort of the behaviours and the dangers. You know, to make sure students or young people have got you know, the knowledge and the skills that they need, you know, to be able to kind of prevent any sort of unhealthy behaviour from developing. But I don't see, you know, I get that there might be, as you say, some people who might claim that, oh, well, you're telling people about gambling younger. But I mean, we have this in lots of other topics as well. You know, there's lots of things that people think, oh, are we telling them too young? But we've got to give young people some credit now. I mean, the access that they've got to information is unbelievable. They know about things. They might not always put certain things together at first, but they are aware of what's going on. So we absolutely have an obligation to teach them about that at the earliest stage possible, really.
And I guess, Daniel, by dint of your job, you'd be very much in favour of that. Yeah,
I think going back to sort of the age thing, all education has to be age appropriate, of course, and the YGAM resources are mapped right the way through all key stages. So, you know, the most appropriate themes are discussed at the most appropriate age. And, you know, I think we have to, going back to collaboration, we have to work with the education sector, we have to work with youth groups, and we have to make sure this conversation is an informed one and an appropriate one. And going back to sort of the role of the racing industry, it's your platform in my eyes. I think, like we talked about the football industry, you know, you are at the heart of communities, and there's a huge opportunity there to be part of the conversation, the efforts to prevent harm, and that's by raising awareness of the issue, but then also raising awareness of the support available. You know, when people do have problems, I think there's a lot of work everybody can be doing to sort of make sure people are finding the appropriate help when they need it also.
Thank you. And I think I know Debbie's answered this, but I'm going to tag one on for you, Debbie, if I may, from Susanna Gill, who's kindly raised a question. Susanna's asking, is there any way of helping making the public debate on gambling less polarized? We can probably do that in an hour or so, but perhaps just your view on that.
I think it's just genuinely, it's about being more open about it. I think part of the problem, if we like, is that everybody's been afraid to talk about it a little bit. So because of that, we've enabled the naysayers to come forward and be the loudest voices. I think the gambling industry is responsible. I think by getting involved more with the community work we're doing, by taking a little bit of a stand maybe, and we can bring that under safer money management, under mental health issues, all of these things have an effect. And I think that the gambling industry itself has that responsibility to maybe get involved at community level, and they can do that through racing very easily, because there's a lot of organisations out there working directly with the communities.
Thank you. Well, you've heard from the panel, and we still have a huge number of attendees online, so thank you so much. We're just going to throw up a quick poll now. There we are. Lucy was red hot on that, so to read that, fairly binary choice, forgive us for that, but do you think racing should be an active contributor to young people's knowledge around gambling and gambling harms? So we'd love, myself and the panelists can't vote, but you've voted with your words for the last 45 minutes, but if the attendees would be kind enough to cast their vote, as it were, then we can see what the view was. But while that's happening, I just want to say huge thanks, and to take Debbie's last comment, I hope we haven't frightened anyone by bringing up this subject from various voices. It's never about that. I think our view, and I speak for Racing to School and Racing Together, is it is a subject that we cannot afford to ignore, that we need to have a voice in the conversation, and you've added some intelligent and insightful, well-placed voices to that debate today. So thank you so much to Lauren, Daniel, Ian, and of course Debbie. I'm pleased to say that 100% of those when asked have agreed with that. So perhaps we've converted some people, perhaps you all came with that view anyway, but we'll put harder questions maybe in our later webinars. But thank you so much for the attendees. Thank you for the questions. Thank you for staying with us. I hope it's provoked some conversations, and that's really the idea of this. We never set out to come up with a big answer, but actually to tackle what is awkward and sometimes uncomfortable, and that was the idea about it. So I'm going to let everyone go, and again, Lauren, Ian, Daniel, and Debbie, thank you so much for sparing your time, and to the attendees as well, thank you. This was the first of a few webinars coming up, and we hope you can sign up for the others, but thank you so much, and have a very good remaining Safer Gambling Week. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.